Gators breakdown here. We know we're business.
Gators breakdown, because there's never a dull moment in Gator Nation.
The Gators Breakdown podcast is ready to go. I'm your host, David Waters. You can find me on social media at GatorDave_SEC, coming at you with some spring Q&A right here with co-host Will Miles at Will Miles SEC out there on X, Twitter, whatever you still call it. Read reaction, of course, as well. All in Will getting and churning. Him and Nick, that preseason magazine coming out along the way. So Will Miles busy on that front, but Will, it's spring practice starting this week, so finally get to talk some football after the exciting finish of 2024. We'll get our first look at the 2025 Gators this week.
It's hard to believe it's already spring practice.
That's true.
It's like, it's amazing how that bowl practice and then the bowl game and all that sort of stuff, like just pushing the season into late December in this case, or early January, wherever that bowl game is, really sort of makes everything come way quicker on the back end coming around. And, Florida actually has a spring game, unlike some other programs this year. And so, hey, we got stuff to talk about. It's good. I mean, we always joke about spring practice and then fall practice, especially being lying season. I don't think that's going to be much different this year, but like you said, getting a first look at some of these guys, especially some of the young guys who've come in early enrollees, there's no doubt that the way college football is set up now, that's an incredibly valuable thing, that you have to rely on freshmen in certain places to at least step in and give you key depth, even if it's not key starters roles. We talked last week about all the returners that Florida had, but still, we know there's going to be injuries. We know there's going to be some things where guys have to step up. And so this is an opportunity to see that. And honestly, when we see first team versus second team, the guys on the second team who are holding their own, that's kind of the stuff I kind of look for in those sorts of things. So it's exciting to see. Hopefully Florida gets through the spring without any injuries. Maybe fills a hole or two in the portal season after spring practice, and then we're ready to go, man. It's going to be August before we know it. And, we'll be sitting here a week before the season going, man, it's almost time for the Sharks. Let's get going.
That's right. Long Island Sharks, but if I know it still sounds weird. Long Island Sharks. Yeah, whatever. They make great drinks, by the way.
No different than the Ole Miss Land Sharks, right?
Yeah, here we go. But yeah, I mean, that's a good point, and some of the questions that we will answer were sent by Gators Breakdown Plus member Harrison Ford. He sent a litany of questions, and then a few on Twitter as well. So we'll get into it. A lot going into the new faces here that we will see are the early enrollees, the true freshmen that are on campus as well, and in uniform for the first time out there with the team for spring practice. So plenty to get into right there. And hey, look, everybody hit that like button, subscribe right here on Gators Breakdown if you're watching this on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform. But that video version, that YouTube version, hit that like button. It really, really helps us out right here. And, of course, our coverage of spring football will be brought to you by Florida Victorious all spring long. With all the new going on there, it's a great time to join. You can be the difference by joining Florida Victorious. Your support can directly impact the outcome on the field. You want to help the Gators win? You want a better game day experience? Well, just like when you pack the swamp, your unwavering support through Florida Victorious empowers the Gators to be their best. If you enjoy player access, you'll find it at Florida Victorious. Members receive invitations to exclusive events like the meet and greet after the spring game, access to exclusive merchandise and memorabilia, great sports covers from Nick De La Torre, and more. There's never been a better time to join. So join today, make a difference in bringing victory to the orange and blue. Visit floridavictorious.com to join now. Well, actually, Florida Victorious helped us out. Really good interview with Pup Howard right now on Gators Breakdown. So definitely look forward. Well, we'll talk a little bit of linebacker here as far as some of these questions go. Pup, one of those players kind of coming back from injury, and we know the defensive backfield's kind of got a lot of players in that same vein. So another thing about spring, you don't rush your guys back too soon if you don't really have to. You know what you have in a lot of these guys. So certainly a storyline we'll be following all throughout spring practice. But let's get it started here, Will, with Harrison Ford on Gators Breakdown Plus, sending a few questions. So, and like I said, more came in on the X Twitter sphere. So start with Harrison here. Which unit are you most looking forward to watching this spring? Well, I took this a couple different ways. the unit I'm most looking forward to watching would be, and I'm going at this from a couple ways. One way I'm going to go at this, the most fun. I think the most fun is going to be wide receiver because there's still some shuffling, I think, going on there. Of course, Elijah Badger, Chimere Dike on the way out. Florida, they're going to have multiple starters now at the receiver spot. And the start event, I think, of course, being projected to replace Badger, Trey Wilson coming back. They'll move him around, of course, to replace Chimere Dike. I think Wilson still can play inside, outside, just like Dike could, and we saw him play it last year. Mizell, maybe, favorite to win that Z position. I think we've had that discussion, but there's some competition there. Vernell Brown III, Tank Hawkins, of course. So I think when you look at it, Will, the receiver spot, there's going to be some competition. Those spots, like, 3 through 6, I think for the wide receiver spot, it's going to be a lot of fun. And you get those early enrolled freshmen, Vernell Brown III, Dallas Wilson, Nashawn Montgomery. I think they'll be competing for playing time along with TJ Abrams, Tank Hawkins, Aiden Mizell, Khalil Jackson coming back from surgery. I think he'll be somewhat limited this spring. So I think you'll see a lot of guys kind of fighting for that 3 through 6, 7 spot there. But I do like Aiden Mizell in that spot. But, I'm going to go a different way with this. And I say that's the most fun, but I think the one I'm looking most forward to is nose tackle. And of course, I think the bad news there for the Gators, you lose Cam Jackson, you lose Des Watson, so you got to replace those guys. So I think that's the biggest question mark for the defense as a whole is the nose tackle spot. Jamari Lyons, of course, he was basically being labeled as a 1B to 1A with Cam Jackson last year. So I think a leading candidate as long as he comes back from injury. I think it's the biggest question on this defense, maybe on this team, is where he's at an integral part of this defense. I think he'll probably be somewhat limited, but you'd love to see him out there. Kai Burrow, next man up at nose tackle. Robinson there, Shivers, the true freshman, also options at the position. So, I'm going for nose tackle as the one I'm most looking forward to, just because of who you have to replace in 2 players. In wide receiver, you can kind of go that way too with Badger and DK, but I think we probably feel better about some of the production that we've already seen at that spot. So I'll go to nose tackle because once you get past the guys who left from last year's team, you really got some questions of who's going to show up.
Yeah, I mean, I can see why you'd say that. I think DeAndre Robinson played pretty well last year, especially when you factor in sort of how young he was in that situation. The wide receiver position makes sense because we're going to talk about that a lot, right? I mean, Sturdivant obviously coming in, and then you've got Mizell. How is he going to jump in? Trey Wilson, is he going to be able to come back from the injury? And then you mentioned the freshmen and guys like Hawkins and some of the other folks back there as well. Certainly there's some intrigue there. I think the place I'm probably looking at is defensive backs, specifically safety. You think about Thornton and Castell were sort of the guys who took over at the end of the year. Castell played the entire year, but Thornton really came on as the year progressed. But you still sort of look overall at their PFF ratings, and we're not talking – Castell didn't have a great year. Thornton was just a little bit above average, even when you factor in him coming on really strong at the end. And Florida's got some good high level safeties coming in Hilton Stubbs and Lagonza Hayward, and those guys, along with some of the guys who've already been in there, I think to me that there needs to be competition at that position. When you really look at where Florida's defense struggled this past year, when they were able to get Havoc and the defensive backs really stepped up, all of a sudden the defense improved. They had to play a lot of 2 deep. They weren't able to blitz, and a lot of that was because the back end couldn't hold up. So to me, the key position in the hole, like you mentioned, nose tackle being a hole, Cam Jackson leaving, I think, does make a difference, but I didn't look at Cam Jackson and go, that guy's a difference maker. I think the difference makers up front for Florida are back in terms of Banks and Tyreek Sapp, which means I look at it and say on the back end of the defense, that's where Florida struggled now for 3 or 4 years. We saw Jordan Castell play pretty well a couple of years ago, and then he kind of treaded water. Maybe it was even a little bit worse this past season. They brought in a lot of guys in the transfer portal last season, and not all of those guys worked out. Certainly Triquez Bridges but Asa Turner didn't, DJ Douglas didn't. So, they have to find a solution at safety. And, if it's Thornton and Castell and those guys take a step forward, great. But I think in many ways, it might be a guy like Greg Smith. It might be one of these guys, like I mentioned, Stubbs or Hayward, or do they move somebody from corner because they've got depth at corner with some of the guys they brought in? And all of a sudden, a guy like Sharif Denson or Aaron Gates plays some sort of safety as opposed to being at the star position. Those are all kind of the things that I'm looking at, because if you think about it, Trikweze Bridges was a safety coming out of the spring game last year and ends up playing a boatload of corner. So, those are maybe the things I'd be looking at, it because that, to me, that's the key to everything. Florida had to scheme around its secondary and its safeties last year. And what that meant was when they played teams like Texas, they couldn't hold up. And if the defense is going to take a step forward, if the defense is going to be much, much improved versus what it was last year, I think safety is the hole where I say, okay, you have a lot of returning experience. The question is, can those guys be consistent? Can they prevent the explosive plays? And is there enough competition behind them that if they can't do that, you've got somebody who can step in and get the job done?
That might be some answer where we go next in, because what freshman are you most looking forward to watching in the spring? And this one kind of relates to the next question for me. It may not for you, Will. What player do you expect to have a Jaden Ball breakout spring game this year? So the two questions, again, I'm going to combine them for me. What freshman are you most looking forward to watching in the spring? And what player do you expect to have a Jaden Ball breakout spring game this year? For me, that's Vernell Brown III. So he's the one I am most looking forward to watching. I do think I talked about the receiver spot, and Will, you kind of gave it away a little bit. We're going to talk about receiver a lot. Yeah, we are. That's to me because of who you brought in for freshmen. The storylines there of losing DK and Badger and Trey Wilson coming back. I mean, there's storyline galore at wide receiver, and because of who you're bringing in. Vernell Brown III, Dallas Wilson. So I'm going Vernell Brown III for the freshman I'm most looking forward to watching, and the player I expect to have a Jaden Ball breakout spring game this year. Now, to peg one guy as the breakout spring game, that's kind of tough. Now, going into the spring game, nobody was saying Jaden Ball. Now, coming out of the spring game, okay, yeah, he's going to do some big things this season. You never really know when you have a good spring game standout if that guy's going to translate to the season or not. Jaden Ball did. But for Vernell Brown III, I think, yeah, for the highly touted freshman that he is, the way he, I think, was very, very, played in a high school offense that was very advanced, was able to move around. I think he can play inside. I think he can play outside. I think they'll be able to move him around to get him on the field as much as possible. And I think it'll put the ball in his hands in the backfield as well, so sometimes. So I think with this offense, a creative way to get or a player that can be creative, you get the ball in his hand in a myriad of ways. So Vernell Brown III knocks out two of the questions for me as the freshman I'm most looking forward to, and somebody who I think could have that breakout spring game.
So I do have two people for this, but It's going to be the same position. So the guys I'm most interested in seeing this spring are Harrison Bailey and Tramel Jones. Because I look at it and I say DJ Lagway was unable to run because of his hamstring last year. But if you had the same quarterback situation that you had last year, would you have run him even if he was healthy? Right? Like, I think against Georgia, it was, hey, we got to win this game and we're going to do what we can. But if you're in a situation where like you need a first down, do you have a guy like, is Tramel Jones able to come in and get you that half a yard to where you don't have to necessarily run Lagway? Can you run some read option and get some stuff with him? Or can Bailey come in if Lagway gets dinged in a game? We saw us years ago, Tebow got the concussion against Kentucky and Florida kind of had to rush him back against LSU. Can you get enough from a guy like Bailey or a guy like Jones to be able to sustain an injury to Lagway? Because look, I mean, we're all excited about what DJ Lagway did last year. We expect him to take a step forward. We're going to talk about that a little bit here on this episode. But the thing that's going to stop Florida is if Lagway gets dinged and can't play. And if you've got Aiden Warner level play from last year against Georgia and Texas, Florida's going to get left out of the playoff because of the games they lose when Lagway's out. And so to me, Florida probably doesn't have the ability to have a bunch of slip-ups. And there might come a time where you need a backup who's competent, who can come in and get the job done. And you hope that Bailey, with all the snaps he's gotten, can do that. But if he can't, or if you need a change of pace, or if you need a quarterback run game and you don't want to expose Lagway to that all that much, can you rely on a guy like Jones to get that done? So that's kind of what I'm looking for. Is I'm confident with where Florida is at QB1. I'm pretty nervous about where Florida is with QB2, because what we saw last year is when the defense is relatively inconsistent, Graham Mertz level play is a 500 football team. And 500 isn't going to get the job done if you can only lose 2 games to get into the playoffs if Lagway misses any amount of time. So, look, I hope Lagway plays the whole year. Obviously, he's a young guy, and we expect him to be fully healthy. But it's not lost on me that the hamstring injury occurred on a designed run. And you do wonder, is Florida going to put him in those positions, given how important he is to the organization? But certainly having a running quarterback at times makes a difference. So again, Bailey being able to come in if there's an injury, and then Tramel Jones if they want to add a dynamic running element where they don't necessarily have it with Lagway, or if they don't want to use it with Lagway. That's kind of what I'm looking for in the spring.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. Tramel Jones would be the most, I guess, fit in your category there. Freshman, most looking forward to watching in the spring, and maybe the breakout spring game. It'd be nice to have Harrison Bailey, the quarterback that'd be opposite DJ Lagway if he goes out there and has a breakout spring game. That would be an interesting angle to it. Oh man, I had some. Oh, you brought something to my mind there. That's very interesting the way you brought it up. I wonder now. Kind of going to your point there. You mentioned Florida needing Lagway to get to the playoff, and if you have 2 losses, okay. 9-3 Florida may still be in the playoff mix. Of course, they will be in the playoff mix. Whether they get in or not, I don't know. But given your scenario, what if it's a 9-3 Florida and Lagway missed a game?
So, I mean, the Florida State fans would be livid, right? like,
I don't care if they are. This is 12 teams, not 4. I don't care what you come up with. But that might be an interesting storyline. And that goes for any team, honestly. But if you have this quarterback who's the stud that everybody looks at, and say he does miss a game, and it is against, say, Texas again, and everybody knows Texas is really good. A 9-3 Florida with a Lagway that missed the game. I mean, I would think that would turn some eyes and be like, hey, we know that team is different. We don't know if the game plays out different or the result isn't any different, but that'd be an interesting storyline.
I mean, I think it depends, right? If you got waxed by a couple of teams and lost by 30 points,
true.
And then you lose a close one with a backup, or maybe get waxed again and one with a backup quarterback. Everybody's like, okay, you can't lose the way Florida did to Texas last year more than once and get an opportunity. Then again, I would have said before the season, you can't lose to Northern Illinois and still make the playoffs either. And that team made it all the way to the championship game. So obviously, we're living in a different world. What I will say is that I don't know if the committee at this point has, other than the high-profile Florida State omission, has really decided to project what a team might be based on injuries. And in that case, it was specifically that Florida State was not going to get its quarterback back, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if they've necessarily projected what might have happened or those sorts of things. And I think the relying on them to make that projection, it's probably not a solid thing for Billy Napier to do. Now, look, I mean, obviously you get Gator Nation riled up if they're 9-3 and lost the game with the backup quarterback. I think we all think they would deserve it based on the schedule. Certainly, who they're going up against. If it's 9-3 Missouri and 9-3 Florida, and you're comparing those two teams, I mean, Florida's going to go just because of schedule, right?
Yeah.
But where it gets interesting to me is if it's 10-2 Missouri and 9-3 Florida, and you're trying to make that decision, right? Or if it's an 11-1 SMU team that lost its conference championship game and a 9-3 Florida, that's where the comparisons start to get a little bit murky. And what we saw this past year is that the committee tends to value wins over conference, at least on that tail end. And to be honest, I don't know if that's the wrong way to do it. I think, from an interest perspective, it was interesting to me to see what those other teams could do. Like I kind of know what Ole Miss or Alabama was last year. Whereas I think everybody was curious about what SMU was last year, and they kind of proved it on the field when they got out there in the playoff. But I mean, look, it's an interesting scenario. Hopefully we don't have to deal with it, because my supposition here is in the spring game, I want to see Harrison Bailey play well enough that Florida wins the game that he sits out, right? Like, look, I don't know that you're beating Texas
Right.
if Harrison Bailey's your starting quarterback, but you're at least competitive. Like last year, Florida wasn't even competitive in the game against Texas. And if you're playing Kentucky, or if you're playing, if you're playing Florida State, or if you're playing maybe even Ole Miss, now that Jackson Dart's not there, like those are teams that traditionally a team like Florida should be able to be ultra competitive with and potentially win with a backup quarterback. And so
we had this conversation of, when the whole Deshaun Purdy drama happened. It was like, well, was he really beating any of these other teams anyway? If he had to come in, so I said it wasn't all that big of a deal anyway. If we were relying on him to beat so-and-so, 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 my confidence wasn't all that high. It's probably a little higher with Harrison Bailey.
Well, and I look at it and say, all right, I'm look, knock on wood, Will's not responsible for the hex he's about to place on him right now. But if you have another soft tissue injury, like a hamstring injury, like Florida rushed Lagway back from that hamstring injury. I mean, the guy's wearing like specially designed pants to make sure his hamstring doesn't fly off the bone, so that he can play against LSU. Props to him for being in and playing in that situation and being able to modify his game and his playing style in order to be able to survive with that sort of limitation. But if Florida had had any option, like if Graham Mertz had been able to play, like you're not playing Lagway in that situation, right? If they'd have had a guy who had shown the ability to run more than just a flood route against Texas, you're not playing Lagway in that game. He comes back for that LSU game because Billy Napier needed that win, Florida needed that win, and the only quarterback on the roster who was healthy enough to play who could get that win was DJ Lagway. This year, if you have something like that, especially if you're let's say you're 7-0 and you're going into a game and Lagway is sort of a game time decision, do you make the decision to play with a guy who's competent but not Heisman worthy, so that you have a healthy Lagway later in the year? I mean, even if he can just spell him for a game or spell him for a half or every season you're going to have some sort of injury. It's football, right? Injuries happen. And to me, the drop off from Lagway to whoever's next right now is significant. And what I'm looking for from Bailey is to show me that the drop off is still significant. I expect it to be significant, but that the drop off is from all-star to steady, not all-star to, oh crap. and to me, I do think you can tell that in the spring game. I think there's an ability to see competency in the spring game at the quarterback position.
Let's keep it on quarterback, and I'll come back to another question that Harrison Ford sent on Gators Breakdown Plus. But while we're talking quarterback, let's just keep it there for a second. Ryan Norman on Twitter asked, what steps does DJ need to take to be an elite quarterback? I've noticed some technique stuff like bad footwork, throwing the ball too hard on for a short route. So, yeah, I think hard for us to really know how much the injury affected him. We know it had a huge effect on DJ Lagway's overall game. But we saw some of those issues before the injury as well. And look, most of that being a young quarterback, putting the ball in harm's way is an improvement I'd like to see, as he also got away with some bad throws like that too last year. This offseason, Lagway's focus, trimming down, interceptable passes, particularly in that intermediate throw route. Will, 7 of his 9 interceptions came in that 10 to 19 yard range for DJ Lagway. So, we all know he could throw the ball down the field and throw it with, beautiful accuracy there. But we all know where the trouble marks were being and throwing it against zone defenses and in that intermediate range. That's where the improvement's got to come from. I think we all have the optimism he'll do fine in these aspects and get better in that part of his game. But, that's where the improvement has to come from. I don't think it's much of a surprise there. But the footwork, those things certainly can be worked on. Like I said, I think with the footwork too, and the injured hamstring, hard to really know how I think those things may be paired together. But also when you're a young quarterback and you had the practice of the footwork and all that, it's different when you get in those game situations. I know there were times where he had to make throws on his own. He had to make up for an offensive lineman not blocking for him or, giving up some pressure. So I think those things mentally can mess with him. But the more reps he gets as a young quarterback and working on the footwork types of things, I think all that stuff kind of will come around. But I think we saw enough good to, I think show us that there's a lot to work with there and there's a lot to feel good about there. While there are some, I'll call them minor improvements, but all those minor improvements that's probably the next step for elite for DJ Lagway.
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually think that the biggest step that Lagway can take is trusting Jaden Ball and Jacoby Jackson.
Yeah.
Because if you look at his statistics, he had a PFF rating of 62.4 when he wasn't blitzed and a PFF rating of 80.8 when he was blitzed. And what that suggests is that when the defense dropped into coverage, he struggled. And I think there's plenty of stats out there that look at, drop 8 coverage and the game against Tulane and the game against Florida State. There was an awful lot of zone being played against him. And one of the problems is that when you try to throw into the teeth of a zone, when the opponent drops 8 guys, you got to run the ball. And so understanding that that's what the defense is doing, identifying the safeties, checking out of the pass and handing it to your running back. Or if you don't check out of the pass, just checking it down to your running back and letting him run for 6 yards, right? That 2nd and 4 or 3rd and 2 is a win if you're sitting there in 1st and 10 or 2nd and 8, right? And so the trusting the running backs. Now, look, I mean, DJ Lagway, one of the seminal qualities about him that we all like is that his eyes go deep to short, right? And so, it's going to be an adjustment for him to work from deep to intermediate to short to then check down. You're getting to your 4th read at that point, but there are multiple times when you watch him where you go, oh, running back is open. If he just checks it down, Florida gains 4 yards and lives to fight another day, as opposed to trying to fit it in between the zone. Or there are multiple times. I actually remember, so I hyped up Joe Burrow before he went to LSU, and he didn't play real well that first year, but they played Miami in the opener, and I distinctly remember him playing like crap in that game, but he checked out of a play where it set up LSU to pop a huge run, and you could see him manipulating what was doing. It looked like he checked the protection or checked the offensive line and the scheme that they were going to use, and then you could tell what he was doing based on what the defense was doing, especially when you looked at it from the all-22. And I went, junior quarterback coming in, that guy may not have had a great game from a numbers perspective, but he just got them the biggest play of the game when they hit a huge running play there in his first game. Now, look, he struggled. He was inconsistent his first year. And then the second year, all the processing and the throwing started to pick up with his ability to manage a game. Lagway's the other direction. Lagway can make all those throws. He can process the throws. I think the thing that I'm looking for is, can you bring the sophomore level or really even a junior or senior level understanding of what you're trying to do to make sure that the defense pays no matter what it does? And last year there were things defenses could do to stop him. I think if he spent enough time in the film room, and I expect that he has, I think that's where you're going to see the improvement. I think you'll see it in efficiency when he's not blitzed. I don't know that you'll necessarily see it in terms of him chucking it downfield or in between zones or anything like that. I think it'll be the throws will look easier, and we'll be like, oh, when was the last time he threw one up for grabs in between a zone? And it'll be a while because it'll feel like he sort of picked up that efficiency of Mertz while hopefully still maintaining the deadliness whenever the defense decides to finally come after him.
Yeah, it's interesting. The kind of question was asked, and I went with the physical part. You went with the mental part, and that's certainly a big part of DJ Lagway's game. Get more ingrained with the offense, like you said. I mean, more experience is going to help him there. The more defenses he sees, and the more going back and looking at last year's film, and like you said, particularly in those late season games there, and that Tulane game, of course. But certainly, first time since Billy Napier's been here. Now he's got his guy. Mertz was returning last year, but still a transfer quarterback. So now the first time at Florida, Billy Napier high school recruited quarterback returning for his second season. So
plus consistency at offensive coordinator, so that everybody's excited about that.
You couldn't resist, could you?
I really can't.
That was good, though. That was good.
Well, I will say, I have a question for you, Dave.
Yeah.
How did Elijah Badger get caught last year? He goes out to the combine, runs a 4.40. I'm sitting there going, wait a minute. Every time Lagway threw him the ball, he wound up getting tackled at the 1 yard line. And then ball would jam the ball in. I mean, Lagway threw what, like 10 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, and he should have had like 17 touchdowns based on how many times ball got to run in from the 1 yard line. It's like the Eagles,
Yeah.
right? Where Jalen Hurts was always putting the ball in. So anyway, sorry.
Teammate Dickey ran a really good fast speed there too. I mean,
well, which makes you wonder, like, you know, makes you wonder sort of, is Florida going to be able to replace that speed?
Yeah.
I think we sort of looked at those guys coming into last year and said they're solid players, but not like physical freaks. And then you see them go out and run sub 4.40s. You go, oh, no wonder they were behind the defensive backs all year long. So challenge accepted for guys like Tank Hawkins, or challenge laid down for guys like Tank Hawkins and Aiden Mizell.
Or what a great segue. Which player in the transfer portal are you most excited about? Asked Harrison Ford, and that would be J. Michael Sturdivant. I think highest rated transfer. Not many transfers to look at here. We don't have to go. We don't have a long list here to look at transfers. J. Michael Sturdivant right here, 6'3", 205 pounds. Going to give Lagway another large target who excels at the contested catches, the wingspan to go pluck balls out of the air, effective against press coverage. J. Michael Sturdivant, polished footwork. He's experienced. Polished footwork, knows how to release it there. Runs fluid routes, got the experience there. Battled injuries at UCLA, but still, flashed his potential there at UCLA. But certainly, hoping he can kind of be. Like Chimere DK somewhere, showed something earlier in his career, had a little lull, and now transfers to Florida, and then explodes for another year. Projected to replace Elijah Badger at the X position there, but Will, the size you want at that spot, he has shown it in some regard. Maybe why not as consistent as we'd like, there. But I know there's some draft love for J. Michael Sturdivant, at least about a year or so ago. If he could kind of live up to his size, his potential. Now he comes to Florida, where Florida, of course, has been able to prove bringing in a transfer receiver from the West Coast. It has worked out pretty well in Ricky Pearsall and Elijah Badger, both those guys from Arizona State. Now the next one from the West Coast, J. Michael Sturdivant, comes in, and hopefully being able to replace and just kind of replicate the history Florida's had at that position from the transfer portal.
Yeah, I mean, so I think obviously you look at a guy like Badger leaving and say, hey, we need to replace him. And Sturdivant's a different kind of player. I don't think he's going to be the burner that Badger was. He also doesn't have the statistical profile that Badger did. I mean, Badger caught like 70 balls a year for the 2 years prior at Arizona State, and then came into Florida and was able to get open in the SEC as well. That'll be the question for Sturdivant, is he was much better in 2022 at Cal than he was in either 2023 or 2024 at UCLA. Are we getting an average wide receiver, or are we getting a guy who really can rise up and be a guy who's a day 1 draft pick or a day 2 draft pick? I think those are sort of the questions that Florida fans, and quite honestly, Sturdivant's probably asking himself in some capacity as well. It's interesting that you migrate to Sturdivant because of what the wide receiver means to a guy like Lagway, but I actually think, and this is maybe, I don't know, maybe this puts me on an island out here. I think the wide receivers are going to be fine because irrespective of who plays, they have a quarterback who's going to be able to get him the ball. So the guy I'm looking at is Michael Caraway, the transfer from Southern Miss at safety. I mean, I got to be honest.
Hold on, and/or corner. Now they can move him around.
Did they just put Caraway on the back of Triquez Bridges' jersey and say, "Hey, come on back here for another year"? Look, I think I'm going to beat this drum all off season. Florida's defense was incredibly one-dimensional because they feared what happened if they put their safeties out there and put them on an island. So if you look at the blitz rate after the Texas A&M game, it went way down. If you look at the amount of middle of the field open coverage that they were playing, so cover 2, cover 4 type coverage went way up after the A&M game. Now look, Florida's defense got a lot better after that A&M game, or after the Mississippi State game, after the bye week. It got a lot better, but one of the reasons it got a lot better is because the guys up front started playing better. There needs to be some complementary stuff going on there too, because eventually you're going to come up against teams with dominant offensive lines. And so so Aiden Warner was a big reason why Florida struggled against Texas. But the Florida defense couldn't get stops against Georgia the week before in the second half when they needed to, even though Carson Beck didn't play very well all year. And then the Florida defense couldn't stop anybody against Texas. And, that defense had an opportunity to keep it close and just fell apart. And one of the reasons that it fell apart is they couldn't get any havoc up front. And then the defensive backs were exposed the minute that happened. And so to me, Caraway or whoever else comes in that position, like, who is going to be behind Castell? Who's going to be behind Thornton? Who's going to push those guys to really improve? One or both of those guys in terms of Castell or Thornton might play really, really well, but they're also going to come up at some point, hit somebody and all of a sudden have a stinger, or, hit somebody and a collarbone's going to go or something like that. Like, that is a physical position, safety in the SEC. You need more than two guys. We saw it last year. The defensive backs went down like flies in 2024. And so Caraway and anybody else they have at that position are folks I'm going to be watching.
I'm going to see if I can find it right quick. Michael Caraway. Let's see. So he had 79 snaps at free safety, 79 snaps in the slot, and 53 at corner. So there you go. I mean, they can. And 205 in the box, according to PFF.
There you go. A little bit different than what we've seen.
Yeah.
With some of the safeties. Now, I mean, look, if Florida's going to put them in the box, then it means they're going to play a fundamentally different defense than they played last year. Because you go watch the film, there isn't a lot of safeties up in the box last year. Thornton maybe a little bit more like that. But I'll tell you, the other part of it is if you look at tackling for Caraway last year, his tackling PFF rating is 67.8. Yep. And I'd have to go look at the other Florida safeties. But I'm going to bet that Thornton and Castell are below 67.8 for tackling.
All right, 67.8. I got you right here. And 67.8, you said, right?
Yep.
So.
75.7 for Castell.
Well, there you go. Bridges, 63.9. So Bryce Thornton, 49.3. Oof.
Yeah.
So if you're looking at your nickel types too, I mean, Dijon Johnson at 60 at corner, Sharif Denson at 44.3. That's surprising.
I mean, honestly, not when you look at the number of explosive plays Florida gave up last year. It really is. It's one of those things where the defense took major steps forward, but the major steps forward almost all coincided with the defensive line playing better. And, as I look more into it, you can see individual games where some corners or safeties played well, but you don't see anything. And this is the thing. If you look at just the overall PFF ratings of the different safeties, right? So let's look at Castell, 46.4 against 10 or Castell, 46.4 against Tennessee, 62.9 against Kentucky, 65.3 against Georgia, 45.7 against Texas, and 73.9 against LSU, 58 against Ole Miss, and then 70.8 and 81 against Florida State and Tulane. A lot of good, a lot of bad. And honestly, I think that it's interesting. The Florida safety play is similar to DJ Lagway. In that there were some explosives, there were some interceptions. There's things like even Gates is somebody who, when I look at his overall PFF rating for the year, it's 62.6. And you sit there and go, below average, Aaron Gates, really? But the thing is we remember some of the big time plays and the attitude that he brought to the defense. And there's no doubt that he made a positive contribution. But overall, throughout the year, it was sort of inconsistent. It's actually the same thing when you look at Lagway. His PFF rating is in the 60s as well. Now, there are other stats that are non-efficiency based where he was excellent. And I think that's one of the things that we're going to have to, like, the story for me for Florida's team overall is making the easy play. Because Lagway can make the difficult one. The question is, can he make the easy one? And I think it's sort of the same thing when we think about the safeties. It's make the easy. You can make the difference.
Oh, you're back.
Oh, did I cut out?
Yeah, you cut out for a second. You're good. You're good.
Well, you can cut out my or just leave it. Whatever.
We'll just leave it. We'll just leave it. You only went out for like a second. It wasn't bad.
Man, wonder what's going on over here. Oh well. So consistency versus explosiveness. I think if you look at a guy like Gates or a guy like Denson or a guy like Dijon Johnson or a guy like even Greg Smith. Like those are guys who had good plays and high highs, but also had low lows. And then the only one that I would say is not that way is Devin Moore, who I think has been consistently good when he's been on the field. And so, from a consistency perspective,
Yeah.
it's really, can we get more than 200 snaps?
Yeah. The greatest overall 72.5. His tackling grade was 78.3, coverage 70.8. I mean, yeah.
Well, and he was in the 78 or 79 the year before too, right?
Yeah.
So him being well above average as a cover corner is a 2-year trend, but it's a 2-year trend with a couple hundred snaps each year. Florida needs 400 snaps out of him, 500 snaps out of him this year in order to be successful at that position, if they're going to get that kind of play on the outside. And again, maybe they just paper it over again and they play a lot of 2 deep, 4 deep, a lot of middle of the field open, rely on the defensive line. Like that was successful at times for the Gators. I don't expect them to completely change their spots. Like it's funny when Ron Roberts was at Louisiana, he was a blitz heavy Austin Armstrong type defensive coordinator who played a ton of middle of the field closed. He went to Baylor and that shifted, and they played a lot. They didn't blitz very much, and they played a lot of middle of the field open type coverages. And the question that I was asking coming into last year was, did he learn something when he was at Baylor about the way college football works and the way it's shifting? And I think he did, because he showed a lot of those same tendencies. And I don't know whether Roberts called the plays all year on defense, but I think it was after the Mississippi State game that people asked Napier whether Roberts was calling the plays. He's like, yeah, he's calling the plays. And from that point on, Florida didn't blitz very much, and Florida played a lot of 2 deep coverage. And so I don't think they're going to completely change their spots, but I think what happens is if you have guys on the back end who can cover and cover well, then it frees you up to every once in a while take the shot.
Yeah, it's funny. I posted a part of a Twitter Spaces I hosted a week ago, and that was part of the things I want to see is, for this whole team in 2025 and this defense is, you may have to be bend, don't break, but let's just be, can we have the ability to be less bend, don't break? And like kind of go to your point, are there parts we can now more take more of the shots? I mean, look, it worked versus LSU and Ole Miss, and really, really good offenses there. Can you repeat that for a whole season? Can you really just play bend, don't break for a whole season and have it successful and be where you want to be as a team?
Well, so let's be honest. If Ole Miss converts the 4th and 1s that Florida got stops on, Florida doesn't win that game. Like their defense actually didn't play that great in the game against LSU. They were streaky. So on the key plays, they were able to do it. A couple of interceptions at key points when Ole Miss was driving in their territory, a couple of 4th down stops, a missed field goal for Ole Miss down in the red zone, a dropped punt that Florida was able to recover. I mean, Florida had like 6 yards.
Then don't break. Then don't break.
Well, I mean, look, it worked. They won the game. I'm happy they won the game. But if you look back at the overall statistics in that one, that's the only one that I look at. Like, I think Florida deserved to win the LSU game. I think Florida, it was sort of a toss-up when you look at that Ole Miss game.
That's what I'm saying. I don't think you can replicate that for a season. That's right. That was kind of my point. I don't think you can. And be where you want to be.
Well, and part of that is that, I mean, where do turnovers come from? Turnovers come from pressure right up the gut. And relying on Banks and Sapp to deliver that all year long does 2 things. One is you're making them win one-on-one battles, and they're going to win their fair share. But the other part is that it relies on them being on the field a ton. And I don't, if you mentioned nose tackle earlier. One of the things that maybe we should be looking for in the spring game is just depth, because on hot days in Gainesville, you don't want those guys out there for 45, 50, 60 snaps. It was interesting a couple years ago when Gervon Dexter was the defensive tackle and really the only defensive lineman worth talking about on the Florida roster. In the first half, he was like a first-round draft pick. Yeah. And then in the second half, he was completely absent. But it was because they never rotated anybody in. He just played the entire time. And by the time he got to the 4th quarter, he was completely wiped. And so, those are the things at some point.
Tyreek Sapp was 11th highest in snap count last year.
Yeah.
416 snaps. So, I mean, Castell, Bridges, Shamar James, Dijon Johnson, Sharif Denson, Bryce Thornton, Jason Marshall had more snaps than Tyreek Sapp. He missed. the last half of the season, Jaden Robinson, George Gums actually played more snaps than Tyreek Sapp, believe it or not. Caleb Banks,
422.
6 more. So yeah, Banks sat with 422 and 416 last year.
So, look, you get efficiency and you get game-changing plays when you keep those guys fresh.
Yeah.
And you can keep those guys fresh by rotating in guys on the defensive line. But the other way you keep them fresh is by having defensive backs who cover for them, right? And when they can't get there, or when the backups can't get there, all of a sudden you have some defensive backs who open.
All I'm hearing is get off the field on third down.
Well, there you go. I concur. That is the goal. That is the goal. So yeah.
Hey, kind of keeping it on this. Good question here too. If you had to guess the starting cornerbacks, who would you pick? So one of the most competitive spots, Will. You've brought it up a couple times here, and the secondary here up for grabs. I think still you had the starters last year. I mean, let's go back to last year. It was Jason Marshall Jr. and Jakeem Jackson who started against Miami last year. So now Devin Moore, Dijon Johnson, probably projected as starters right now, but look, there's going to be some competition for Cormani McClain from Michael Caraway. So both Moore and Johnson had shoulder surgeries. I've chronicled that all winter here on Gators Breakdown, but Moore is cleared for spring practice, Will. So that should be designated, news, put it on the bulletin board. Devin Moore cleared for spring. Dijon Johnson will be limited to non-contact work to start spring. So, I think if the spring game was now, Moore would be there. Probably would Caraway or McClain. So that's what I'm interested with Caraway or McClain. McClain apparently has bulked up, bigger, more ready to go. Physically this year. But that cornerback room is significantly impacted by injuries. Grimsley will be out with ACL revision surgery. Johnson, as I mentioned, he'll be limited. So McClain, his development, especially noteworthy, bulking up, impressing in offseason workouts. Brought him up before in talking about true freshmen this in some episodes here on Gators Breakdown, but Ben Hanks coming in, and we talked about these injuries, so I think that gives him kind of a leg up as far as a freshman early enrollee who can come in. He has elite ball skills, and now at a position that I think true freshmen really can make an impact. And that group is thin due to injury, so it would not surprise me if Ben Hanks is in there making plays this spring as well. But I'd say spring-wise, you're probably looking at Devin Moore, Caraway, or Cormani McClain. We'll see how healthy and how available Dijon Johnson is. By the time the season rolls around, I'm still going to call me boring. I'll go Devin Moore and Dijon Johnson. I think Dijon Johnson got better as the season went on, made that big play versus LSU early, their first drive of the game. They're going for it on fourth down, and wide receiver run out wide for LSU, and Dijon Johnson's coming up and making a tackle in the backfield. That's the type of play I like seeing, from your defensive back, more aggressive. We saw better tackling as the season went on there, but I think looking at corner, I'll go boring. By the time the season rolls around, Devin Moore, Dijon Johnson. But a lot of competition there. Probably one of my biggest questions is how much growth do we see from Cormani McClain?
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned McClain. I don't think – did you mention Jameer Grimsley?
I did, but only because he'll be out for most – he had the ACL revision surgery.
Yeah. But, so I think there are they're thin. They're thin. There's no doubt that they're thin. And when you think about a guy like Moore and how little he's actually played, just wrap that guy up in bubble wrap for the spring game and let the other guys get snaps. That's for sure. Like you said, Caraway, I sort of pegged him at safety, but maybe you need him at corner. Yeah. And then a guy like Denson, the ability to does he have the ability to slide outside and help out there? Look, Florida was a mash unit on that side last year. They had a lot of positional versatility, the ability to move, bridges from safety to corner. I'm sure they'll be looking at that for Caraway as well. But there's no doubt. Florida, you can't get by in the SEC with two good corners. And so Denson or McLean or Caraway or somebody else is going to have to jump into that fold and contribute right away. And so, look, I'm glad that guys like McLean got some run last year, same as I'm glad guys like Greg Smith got some run at safety. I mean, really, when you think about it, the injuries were rough last year, but given the way the season finished, getting all those guys some playing time was probably a useful thing overall when we really think about it. But look, man, there's no doubt they're going to have some health luck on that side of the ball. Or, like I said, they're going to have to paper over some of the holes again. Yeah. And they know how to do it, or at least they've shown that they know how to do it. But the idea that they're going to be less bend but don't break without significant upgrades or significant improvements at the cornerback position, I think is probably pretty foolhardy. Like there's just I have a lack of confidence that the guys who start are going to be able to finish the year. And, you don't think of that as being a physical position, but, considering all the shoulder injuries those guys have had, guys who are coming in off of shoulder surgeries, you put your head down one time to get the running back coming around the corner and all of a sudden you're on the shelf again. So, certainly.
Or to your point, Will, you play LSU and, Nussmeier throws 3-yard routes and you got to come up and make a tackle all the time.
Hey, I'm here for it. Got one more year of that stuff, man. Going to be like the number 1 draft pick and the Heisman favorite. Like I still haven't figured out how to short that, by the way. I've been trying. Like, is there a way to bet against it? Can I take the field? Like, what does it look like if I take the field?
Oh, man. That question there on the cornerbacks came from Matthew Walker, if I didn't mention, by the way, there on X. So last one right here on it comes from X as well. Nate at Gump Runner CLT. Who are you starting linebackers? So we just had the question about cornerbacks and more about linebackers here. And, of course, Will, biggest thing here, we got to replace Shamar James, of course, NFL bound as well, at the Will spot. So Pup Howard, of course, he'll be returning from injury at the Mike, the middle linebacker spot. So one guy leaving, one guy returning from injury. Primary position battle here, I think. Jaden Robinson, Miles Graham at that Will spot. Robinson, a lot of experience, production. He plays when he's on the field. Graham, maybe the higher upside there. I think both will receive a lot of playing time, regardless of who starts. That's how good this room is. And but Pup Howard, his health is going to remain a question mark. You heard the interview with him, certainly rehabbing and feels like he's good to go there, but still until we get out there on the field and see how healthy he is, might still be limited somewhat in spring. So maybe Robinson slides over the mic, and that creates Miles Graham to get some more spots at that Will spot here in the spring. So, Childs can, jump in there as well. So, and I think he's going to play a lot. Just one more time, Ty Jackson as well, the true freshman, just gives you just how deep this room is. For years, a room that lacked depth is now one of Florida's most talented rooms. There's some depth in this room. Got to get a little bit healthy there with Pup Howard, but I think by the time the season starts, it'll be Pup Howard and Graham. But I won't be surprised at any combo here, Will, just because of, I think, who has played, who has produced when they're on the field, and just the ceiling of guys like Miles Graham and Aaron Childs.
Yeah, I think Jaden Robinson and Aaron Childs are good players. I think Miles Graham has an opportunity to be special.
Yeah.
As a true freshman, PFF 68.1 on 183 snaps. So above average linebacker play from a true freshman who's in there. But it's interesting. He had 5 snaps against Tennessee, and then all of a sudden 19 against Kentucky, 18 against Georgia, 23 against Texas, 31 against LSU, 12 against Ole Miss, 14 against Florida State, and 26 against Tulane. He took a significant step up in his play from that Kentucky game on. So 73.2 PFF rating against Georgia, 53.5 against Texas, but given how bad Florida was against Texas, it's actually not terrible. 80.1 against LSU, 76.1 against Ole Miss, and then 60.8 versus FSU and 57.6 against Tulane. So still some up and down, definitely. But when you look at where the bulk of, if you want to say like his PFF rating comes from, it's from that second half of the season. And lo and behold, when was Florida's defense better? The second half of the season. And all of a sudden you got a linebacker who's rating very highly. So if you look at tackling against LSU, Ole Miss, and Florida State, his tackle rating for PFF, 82.1, 79.7, 73.1. The linebacker was getting the guy on the ground. And you think about LSU, like what was critical in that game? It was the 3-yard pass from Nussmeier, get the guy on the ground. And so
and think about also the storyline we were just talking about there, how important that was. Pup Howard's out these games. So somebody had to step up.
Yeah, and you look at Dijon Johnson, you mentioned earlier, getting LSU on the ground on an important 4th down play. But to me, the tackling of that front seven, the havoc that front seven caused, and Graham was a huge part of that. So I look at Pup Howard and say, early in the year, Pup Howard, before he suffered an injury, was a player that we looked at and said, okay, that guy's going to play in the NFL. And I would say late season, Miles Graham is a guy that you look at the tape and go, that guy's going to play in the NFL. So if you got 2 NFL level linebackers there, look, Aaron Childs might play in the league. Jaden Robinson might play in the league, but I think those 2 guys have a real opportunity to play in the NFL. I think Graham and Howard are the 2 guys you look at and just say, I get it. I mean, it's the same thing that I would have said Montrell Johnson versus Trevor Etienne when Etienne was here is Johnson was a very good running back. But Etienne looked different when he hit the hole. And it just, there was more explosion and there was more power. I think you see the same thing when you look at Graham. Like, all those guys are very good players, but Graham shows something different. And I will say the thing that I think is an area that he can improve in is pass coverage, but he has the skills to do that. So we talked last week about having linebackers lined up on the outside to come in as pass rushers, essentially doubling as edge rushers. I think Graham has the ability to do that, but I think it also allows you to be multiple because he can line up and pretend he's going to be an edge rusher, fall into coverage, cover some tight ends. And, we talk about DJ Lagway, what he would improve on in year 2. But one of the things we should be talking about is Miles Graham was an above average linebacker in the SEC as a true freshman. And what can he improve on going from year 1 to year 2? Aaron Childs, his PFF rating was 53.1. So while we saw flashes, nowhere near the level of play that Graham put up. And again, PFF's one number, I get all that. But Graham, when you look at the tape, I think was a superior player, and I'm expecting him to start this year.
Yeah, I do too. Pup and him, man, I can't wait. Those 2 guys beside each other. That's going to be really good. One more time, plug the interview. You can hear more about linebacker there from Pup Howard. He goes into the room a bit as well. So really good stuff from him. Big thanks to Florida Victorious for setting that up. So, all right, Will, anything else? Round out this episode, of course, Gators start spring practice on Thursday. So we'll hear from Billy Napier on Thursday, and then I know we didn't go into every position here, and one reason for that is, look, we'll hear from every position coach all throughout spring. So we'll kind of just get our position primer all throughout spring practice here as we hear from those coaches, those position coaches, those players will be speaking, of course, right here on Gators Breakdown. You know how we do it here on spring. We'll hear from those coaches and those players and kind of give you a preview of those positions all throughout spring practice. So really looking forward to it, Will.
Yeah, man. You didn't ask me about the special teams, Matt. Like that's a key for.
Did you see the question?
No. Did somebody ask a question about the special?
Yes.
Oh, that's great.
Let's see. All right, let me find it. Oh man, I wasn't even going to include it, but I have to now.
Every time I see that stupid Matt, I think of Office Space with the jump.
So Mark Scott, who likes to joke a lot on Twitter, and this question was a joke. I should have included it anyway, but we were here in an hour, so I was trying to wrap up the episode. But you brought it up. Mark Scott does say, in year 2, will the special teams bat finally break through? Hey, for the most part, it did. Special teams were
much better last year than they have been.
Now, what happened at the end of the year? No, Will. But for the most part, overall, they were much better.
We didn't have any ridiculous Arkansas type debacles.
No,
that's for sure. And
Chimere Dike was a really good punt returner.
Yeah, I mean, look, the expectation, and this is something that Billy Napier, unfortunately, is just going to have to fight against, is that anytime something isn't perfect, there's going to be a segment of the fan base, including potentially myself, who rips in because of the past misbehaviors, right? And it's like, and this really was sort of the case for people who were done at the end of the A&M game last year. Was we haven't seen anything that's making things better. So the last 4 games of the year, I think you can say, obviously, things got better. And I think with special teams, you can say things got better. And I think with some of the freshmen that we've talked about, or the true freshmen last year, obviously with Lagway, but Graham as well, things got better. Banks and Sapp, things got better. So that progression is what gives us all hope that 2025 is going to be the year that Billy Napier and his staff are going to be able to break through. But there's still scars, man. like when you have the kind of gaffes on special teams that Florida had in his first 2 years, it's not something you just get over easily. And so it's the reality. Perception is reality in many cases, right? Like, we expect Billy Napier to go up there and say, we're not going to bid for recruits and all that sort of stuff. And that's my expectation at this point. So if he says something different, I'm like, well, okay, he said something different. That's interesting. Same thing with special teams. Like, the expectation was set that special teams were going to be we're going to be sloppy. And so when you see an additional, one more data point that says sloppy special teams, we jump all over it. But I think it is worth saying that the special teams last year were much better, and that, there are some hiccups. There's always going to be hiccups.
Yeah.
I mean, you're going to have blocks in the back. You're going to fumble a punt every once in a while. You're going to miss field goals from time to time. The punter's going to shank one.
If year 1 and year 2 would have looked like last year, it'd be non-issue.
Sure. Again, I think one of the interesting things is I remember I was incredibly invested in Burrow because I had written so glowingly about him, and he wasn't really that great his first year there. The second time I brought up Burrow in this episode, but I remember, so I watched the LSU team in the game against UCF or Central Florida for the bowl game. And I was sitting there going, God, it must suck to root for LSU. Like, they have all this talent all over the field, and they just constantly shoot themselves in the foot. Like, that entire bowl game, I kept waiting for them to pull away from Central Florida because Central Florida wasn't that great a team, and LSU was clearly better, but it was like they just kept doing stupid stuff. And I was like, God, it must really stink to root for LSU. And what it felt like in year 1 and year 2 under Napier is that exact same feeling, where it just felt like you were right there on the cusp of getting a win or having the drive, or your defense finally gets a stop. And there weren't a whole lot of stops in the first couple of years of the defense. You finally get a stop and you do something stupid on a punt, or you don't have enough guys out there for a field goal attempt or whatever, right? And that's what it felt like. So last year, I did not feel like that with special teams. And I think the first 4 or 5 games of the year, I kept expecting to get stabbed. It's like I'm waiting, I'm looking around for the special teams guy to knife me in the back, but it never really happened. And so, we still have scars though. Like, somebody still, we still had 2 guys wearing number 3 in a game in that first year. And you don't forget those types of things. Like, those are the gaffes where you go, like, that's an oversight problem, not a one-off. And so it's great that Florida's been able to fix that. It's great they brought in a new guy at special teams, and that seems to make a difference. And obviously that's something we'll be looking for in 2025 to be even better than it was in 2024. And hopefully I'll be able to control myself when we have the inevitable mistake that will happen when you've got 18 to 22-year-olds running around on special teams.
Yeah, I think somebody even asked about who's kick returner, punt returner. Punt returner, I have no idea. Kick returner, I think. Well, we saw Jaden Ball do some kick returner last year, right? So
a little bit.
Yeah, I mean,
it's got to be Hawkins or Mizell, right?
I've said that for the last 2 years. Those guys get, Mizell 2 years ago. I mean, look, probably tough for true freshmen. I do think we have learned, at least punt returner, Billy Napier's going to put somebody back there who's got experience. I mean, Pearsall, DK, the guys who. Yeah, those guys were transfers, but came in and were the guys there at that position. So maybe it's J. Michael Sturdivant as the punt returner next year, because he would fit the transfer wide receiver coming in and be in the punt returner mold. But
it's interesting. So after seeing Mizell make that run against Mississippi State that got called back for the ridiculous block at the back call or personal foul call on Montrell Johnson, how is that guy not returning punts? Like, I just look at it and go, give him an opportunity. And honestly, one of the things that I'm going to be really monitoring this year is, where does Billy Napier find edges? And, the Pearsall obviously was the best punt returner that Florida had at the time. I think you can make a case that DK was reliable, but not spectacular back there as a punt returner. But if you have an opportunity to turn the game,
I thought he was better than average.
I mean, yeah, but I wouldn't say he was a game changer, right? He's not
Okay,
Brandon James back there, right?
No. Okay, yeah, no, yeah,
So
yeah,
like
definitely not that level.
there are guys where when you punt the ball to them, you go, "Oh crap, I have to keep it away from this guy." And I think Mizell has the ability to potentially be that kind of guy. And so, if you need to put him back there with the jugs gun and just fire those things at him, if you need 3 Australians kicking to him all practice long, like I don't know what you need to do, but that guy in the open field
Yeah.
is somebody you have to account for. And so maybe you say we don't want him in there because he's so valuable at wide receiver. Well, then you got to find somebody else who has those sorts of skills and that kind of speed.
I don't know. I mean, you put Pearsall and DK back there, and those guys, it would have sucked if Pearsall got hurt 2 years ago. It would have sucked
absolutely.
if DK got hurt a year ago. So I don't know if that really enters their mind as much.
Well, I mean, look, we're talking about a guy who got shot and played like 3 weeks later. So Pearsall's a pretty tough dude.
Yeah.
Yes. I'm not saying it makes sense. I'm saying where are the edges going to come from, right?
Mhm.
And if you can pick up a touchdown in a game against Texas or a game against Georgia without having to do anything other than you got the right guy back there returning kicks, or you've got an explosive guy returning kicks. I mean, really, you think about that 2006 year, or you think about all the Brandon James returns that just completely changed games. Some of those close games against Tennessee where you've got like Tebow 4th down conversions and things like that in various games were set up by the fact that you had touchdowns early in the game that were set up by James, maybe not necessarily taking it all the way to the house, but putting Florida in position to be able to score. When you've got guys with game-changing speed, you got to find a way to get it in their hands in open space. Kickoff's a little bit more difficult. Ball usually just goes deep in the end zone. You don't necessarily want to return it back. You want guys with sure hands who aren't going to fumble, those sorts of things. When it comes to punts, I sit there and I go, where are you going to find the edge? So if we're talking special teams, I think we can say Florida's special teams were not a net negative in 2024. They were a definitive net negative in 22 and 23. Can they be a net positive, right? Can you get more out of your special teams than your opponents do? How do you figure that out? A lot of that is obviously kick returners, but some of that is you've got all this experience coming back. So you should have a lot of guys who aren't going to make the block in the back when you've got the good return going on. Guys who aren't going to hold, guys who are able to take advantage of that experience out there on the field. And hopefully Florida will be able to put an above average unit out there, because it would be awesome if Florida could pick up. So in last year's preseason magazine, I wrote about how in starting field position, Florida cost themselves 2-point-something points per game just based on starting field position. I guarantee you, I haven't done it yet, but I guarantee if I go back and do that analysis, they will have not given up that much in 2024, but I don't think they will have gained. Like, I think,
I was about to say, I wouldn't say it would, I don't think it would probably be positive overall though.
Yeah. So then the question becomes, can you make it positive in 2024? I think, one of the lessons that we should take from the 2024 season is I think Ole Miss was one of the top 3 or 4 teams in the country. And I think a lot of the things on the edges, and some of that has to do with transfer portal and continuity and all that sort of stuff. But I think that they lost 3 one-score games that they were in each of those games and just weren't able to make the plays. But think about it. If they had taken advantage of some of the little edges at various points along each of those games, if they just win one of the 3, they're in there easily. And, we're not in a situation anymore where you have to be perfect. We're in a situation where you've got to be able to get an edge in some of those games where, things just don't go your way all the time, and it used to be that you only had one loss, and once you had the one loss, you were out and all that sort of stuff. So you really kind of did need to be almost perfect and maybe get a little bit lucky at the end. But you don't have to do that anymore. But that means that there's going to be a game or two. If you're sitting there right on the edge of 10-2 or 9-3, there's going to be that game. Can you get the special teams play that puts you over the hump? I mean, even you think about the SEC championship game in against Arkansas in 2006, right? The fake punt from Urban Meyer, the dropped punt that Wandy Pierre-Louis recovers. Like, those teams won the special teams battle consistently over time, put their team in positions where they could gain extra points, extra edges. And that 2006 team was a hair away from not making it to the national championship that year.
If I'm not mistaken, 2006, that same season against LSU. And during the season, big special teams play, making a big difference.
So it turns out that is an important component of the game, and it'd be nice to get a net positive from the Gators in 2025. That's for sure, man.
There we go. Starting off spring practice right here this week, kind of our first look in depth at the 2025 team. As I said, we'll have more all throughout spring practice right here on Gators Breakdown. Will Miles, ever working on that Read Reaction preseason magazine. So, hey, spring will go a long way in putting your final touches on that magazine as well.
Oh man, I can't wait to be done. Like we got the cover, we got some ad copy that's been made up. I'm excited for people to get to see it. I think, we started this thing 3 years ago and it was like a digital thing that we had out there and people were excited, but they said, hey, we want something in our hands. We want an actual magazine. So we've sort of progressed to get into a point where I remember 2 years ago, I had like 500 of them sitting on my table. My wife is like, when are these getting out of here? Like, can you please mail these out? To last year, we'd progressed to having it on Amazon and people respond to that. So this year, we're going for it, man. We think the product's going to be really good for people this year. Obviously, the product on the field in Gainesville is more exciting than it's been in the last few years as well. And so excited to see the marrying of the magazine and hopefully the Gators giving us a year that we can't forget, man.
Same here right here on Gators Breakdown. All right, Will, good stuff. Spring practice right here around the corner for the Gators. That's Will Miles at Will Miles, SEC, readingreaction.com. I am the host of Gators Breakdown, David Waters. You can find me at GatorDave_SEC right there on social media. Guys and girls out there, thank you for joining us on this episode of Gators Breakdown.